Welcome to my OSGi tutorial series. In this sixth episode, the client. In this session, we will look into consuming our services from a different OSGi component. We will use the adapter template and create a component that is not a service. So we're going to make a distinction between a service and a component. So let's get started.
In the last episode, we were talking about OSGi testing or unit testing, and that is basically deploying a component, some kind of a unit test component wrapper into the framework, into the OSGi framework, and running as a potentially client. So the client register for services, the services are injected, and then you can run assertions on them. So what we're going to do in this episode, we're going to look at creating a real client, client that actually does something with the code, not just for testing. Before we go into that, I'm going to just briefly talk about OSGi component and OSGi services. So far I've been using components and services and service interchangeably without really pointing to the differences. So component is just a package that OSGi recognize and deploy as a unit. A component becomes a service when it's exporting an API, when it's exporting an interface. When a component is actually declaring something that it's doing, it's using a service, that is when it becomes a service. So other OSGi component can use it. But something very interesting is happening here is OSGi is doing a lazy loading. So let's demonstrate that really quickly using a constructor. So we create a constructor and we're going to just log that out from the system. Out, print, and then we call it booking implementation. And the runtime is still running, but there's nothing going on. And the reason nothing is going on is because the service doesn't actually exist in the framework, because nobody's actually calling this service. So the component, the class, is actually not initiated yet. So let's call it. Let's do that again. So no constructor was created, but if we do booking, great, we get a constructor called, and then function is called a method. If we do it again, then another component is created for us, and it's as kind of a one-time event. So remember that when we go into our next section. So now we're going to create another project called, it will be a client implementation. Again, we're going to use the enRoute template. Just for a little bit of variation, we're not going to get a provider, we're going to create an adapter, just for variety. So adapter and provider are basically the same template. We just want to wrap them in a different name for now. So what does it give us? We get the booking implementation class, and I'm just going to add here adapter so we can see this in the runtime later on. So what do we have is again the same setup. We're going to clean this up a little bit. So as we know, we want to use a service service is defined in an API, in an API project, in an interface. So in order to use that definition, we have to add that to the class path. We also want to add some runtime, so we want to resolve that, make sure that it runs. We can save that, and we can actually close this and start another one. And here there's nothing going on. And no, apart from the adapter, there's nothing else running. So let's see what we get. Let's create a constructor. And let's do the same thing. System out print, and we create oops. And behold, because it's just a component and not a service, then OSGi automatically initiate it for us. And that's a distinction between the other service. If you notice that it's not being initiated until it's being called. So OSGi knows that this is a component and it knows it needs to start it. There are more things and features you can do on the service. We'll look at it in maybe future episodes, or you can discover on documentation. But this is one of the biggest differences. Now, in this component, we know that there is a booking API, and we want to get an instance of it. So we got the booking API, which will give us a service. But how do we get a reference to that service? How do we get this service initiated in OSGi? Now, if you remember, in the test project, we have to go through some kind of loop in a function to get that requested, and we had to request it from the OSGi because it wasn't a proper OSGi component. But now we're in an OSGi proper component, and we can do something like reference, and we can ask the OSGi to inject that service by calling the set booking. Now, the name doesn't matter much, but what important is the API, the declaration of that function that requests the booking service. And now we can basically do this, booking equal booking, and we should get a reference. Now, if you remember from previous episodes, if it's trying to resolve something that it doesn't know what it is, you'll get an error. So immediately you get this error because the runtime doesn't know anything about the implementation of the API. So the code knows about the API, the path knows about the API, but the adapter is not in the runtime. Sorry, not the adapter, the provider. So the provider is not in the runtime. And once we go that, not only you get the adapter, but the implementation of the service is also initiated because it's been referenced. We can prove that by going in here and doing another log saying show us the reference implementation of that, and we can do booking, and yeah, we should get that. Reference to the class, reference to the service. The service was injected into my adapter, and now it's ready to use. So let's look a little bit about, before we wrap up this session, let's look a little bit about the life cycle of OSGi components. So I'm gonna describe that as OSGi give you like a mechanism for to hook into the life cycle of the component. So it's used by two different methods. One is the activate. An activate is void. It's a annotation for a method that is called after everything is being initiated. So in this case, we're going to do activate, and now we see that our lifecycle change a little bit. We get the service initiated first, then our class, then all the references are being resolved, which is in our case just one, that reference, Then we are ready to use and everything is ready and we can activate. For example, if you want to do something with that service after or with several services, then you know that it's been activated properly. Now, OSGi also give you another hook, activate, which is very similar to activate but does everything you expect on the way out. So when a component is being dropped from service, then the deactivator is going to be called. When the deactivator is being called, you can do things, closing resources, closing services, or doing cleanup before everything is taken and your component is being dropped. So let's do an update. Let's say, okay, let's call our booking reference in our activate when it's ready. Greeting, and we save. And what we get is, first we've been deactivated, then the service was created, then our adapter client was created, then we got the reference to the service, which is the service implementation, then our activated was called, our service is available, of course, because all the injections have been resolved, and we can call it. So the activated happens before everything, and I believe we can still call our service in the deactivate without getting an error. So we get a deactivate and the service is gone. So I was wrong, the service is gone now because we've been deactivated. So this is the last thing we do after everything is being taken away. So it's a nice little game we can play with the environment and check all the hooks that OSGi gives us when services are in the runtime. Again, if you look at it, it's very, very clean. We just said we want a booking reference. We didn't say which provider. The provider was injected into our environment using the runtime definition. And so now if we want to explore how this is looking in the running environment, all we need to do is to add the X-ray. That will give us the console, the web console, and then we can go about and looking in our browser. And if we look at the bottom here, we should have the adapter bundle, we should have the API, and we should have the provider. The provider gives us the service, the adapter gives us the component that actually use that service defined in the API, and they're all activated. We can also look at X-ray and look for our two adapter and provider, and you can see that it's supposed to be linked. Let's discover that again. Here we go. So our booking API is linking our provider with our adapter, and if you can see that, reference is being utilized, and that's why it's yellow. If you remember in previous episode, it was it has a white background, which means that it's not being consumed by any client. So that concludes our episode on adapter, and we're gonna extend a lot in later episodes. Thank you very much.